The play on the field, the court, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and vendors who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go Behind the Game with Patrick Klinger and Dave Bowden.
Welcome to Behind the Game, presented by Blaze Credit Union. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. Alongside me, the Caitlin Clark of Credit Unions.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Dave,
that's pretty
just
big.
give me the damn ball, Bowden.
Yeah, you're talking about. You want to talk my high school basketball career? That sounds good.
Dave, we've got a great guest today, a gentleman who's been on the Minnesota sports scene for decades.
Yep. Joe Schmit, award-winning broadcaster, community leader, philanthropist, author, very popular keynote speaker, and I can say that from personal experience. You do a fantastic job with that. As a sports broadcaster, Joe's covered every major sporting event in the past 4 decades, interviewed many of the biggest names in sports. If I have this right, you joined KSTP TV in 1985 and has won 18 Emmys from the National Television Academy. 19 as of now, yep. And also honored with the National Headliner Award in 2001. So welcome to the show today, Joe. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here. And I've actually watched this show before, so I know you guys are out there and you do a good job. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So you've been a fixture on the Minnesota sports team for decades, in media and just in town with all the things we've talked about. You're a motivational speaker, author, volunteer, as we mentioned. You're a cancer survivor, a family man. Do you ever get any sleep? How do you do all this?
You know what? I've got this new ring here that kind of measures my sleep. I'm trying to make myself, when I do sleep better. So I'm working on my sleep. You know what? I like to stay busy, and it's interesting because my wife likes to stay busy too, and people look at us and think we're absolutely crazy. Our house is never clean. I do not have the best lawn in the neighborhood, but we have a lot of fun.
That's good.
You know, Joe, you've been coming into our homes reporting on sports for 40 years. I mean, which makes you a certifiable local celebrity. Yeah. So you go out and about. Do you enjoy the attention and fans and viewers coming up and chatting with you, or does it become a little bit of a hassle sometimes?
Well, I'll tell you what, Patrick, it's changed because TV has obviously changed. And if the people are under 30 years old, they have no idea who I am. My wife was the one who first noticed it. You'd walk into a sports bar. If I walked into a sports bar 15 years ago, I couldn't get to the bar before somebody offered to buy me a beer. Now I could walk in there naked and nobody would know who I am and who's that guy over there. I mean, it is a little bit different because people are all now disseminating their news and getting their news a little bit differently. And we certainly don't have the viewership that we had many years ago. But like any business, we change too. We try to go viral. We try to get on cable. We try to get online like you guys. That's where you try to get more eyeballs.
So let's step back a little bit to look at kind of how you've gotten to where you are today. You were born in Seymour, Wisconsin.
Yep. Home of the hamburger, by the way. It's Seymour. That's our festival every year. It claims to be the home of the hamburger.
We'll go with it.
Yeah, yeah.
University of Wisconsin lacrosse. Worked at TV in both lacrosse and Green Bay at one time. I happen to be a Wisconsin Badger, so I like to have this question.
Really?
Thank you. But as a native of Wisconsin, the Badger State, what were the teams that you really grew up with as a kid, and what got you into sports as you were growing up?
Well, I grew up 13 miles from Green Bay, so obviously growing up, the Green Bay Packers were pretty big, and as a matter of fact, my dad ran the American Legion Club in Seymour, a bar, and they would take 2 buses to every game at Lambeau Field. And I have 2 other brothers, and for every game, we would go down into the bar. We lived in the house connected to the bar. We'd go down into the bar ready in case somebody had an extra ticket. So we went to many Green Bay Packer games. And back then, nobody thought about scalping tickets. Nobody thought, there was no online to go and resell them. So we got to go to many Packer games along, just tagging along, riding the bus. And we learned a lot because those people were tailgating too. And at a young age, we were seeing things we probably shouldn't have seen.
Right.
But I remember, even when I was very young, I became a Hank Aaron fan. The Braves had left to go to Atlanta, but I'd heard so many stories about Hank Aaron, so I was a Hank Aaron fan, and I used to, when he was chasing Babe Ruth, I had a transistor radio that worked in the upstairs bathroom in our house, and I'd listen to 7:50 a.m. and listen to Henry Aaron chase Babe Ruth for home runs.
I got to just divert just a little bit, Patrick, because I love that story, and I know you were talking about the eras and all that, and listening to baseball games on an AM radio from somewhere that you could try to tune in. That was how we got sports when we were kids. I would try wherever I could to pick up KMOX in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
I know to listen to the Cardinals, and I think we missed those days a little bit with everything we have now.
I can remember all the time you'd be out in the country at night. You could pick up CCO in Wisconsin, but you'd pick up KMOX, you could pick up Atlanta, you'd pick up a Chicago radio station. It was nothing like catching a baseball game. Now, every once in a while when you do it, you'll once in a while catch a high school game. And I love it because some of these high school announcers in Cambridge, Minnesota, or strange little place, they're really good.
Yeah, they're the next one you hear. You never know.
They're really good. They just, they're just in a small market, and it's always fun I enjoy that.
Joe, share with us, if you will, your journey from growing up in a community of less than 4,000, I think, correct?
Yep.
To becoming a Minnesota sports institution. I mean, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was an athlete when I was a kid, and I was, just like a pretty average athlete, but I loved everything. I played, in high school, we could play only three sports, so I played baseball, I wrestled, and I played football. And in the summer, I golfed and did everything. I played any sport I could all the time. When baseball season came around, I'd play for 2 or 3 teams, and my mom would always have all these, with 2 brothers, the clotheslines would all be baseball uniforms. So I loved baseball. Dreamed of playing Major League Baseball, football, whatever. And at some point when I realized I was really kind of going to be an average athlete, somebody said to me, and I wish I could remember because it was an impact, with your big mouth and your love for sports, you ought to become a sportscaster. And from that moment on, I wanted to be a sportscaster. And I watched a guy by the name of John Campbell in Green Bay. It was on WBAY TV every night. He was my favorite sportscaster. So fast forward, I go to school at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse for mass communications to become a sportscaster. I get a job, I get an internship, I beg my way into a station, and I work in WKBT in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Small market. I was terrible. If they had any of those tapes, I'd be done. I mean, if the YouTube era would have been around, I'd have been done because I was boom goes the dynamite guy, if you recall that guy. Anyway, one day I'm sitting at the office. By this time, John Campbell had taken a job in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And there's a phone call, and I pick it up. Is Joe Schmit there? And I paused for a second. I said, is this John Campbell? I recognized his voice. I got hired on the spot. I think I got hired on the spot. So I ended up working for John Campbell for 1 year in Cedar Rapids before I went to Green Bay, my home market, for 5 years. But in that 1 year with John Campbell, I called that where I earned my master's degree. Because John was a consummate pro. And he wasn't the guy to tell you how to do stuff. It was through osmosis. I just watched how John cared about the product, was a great storyteller, concentrated on writing, learned that it was not about him. The story's about the person you're doing, and you have to think about who's in the audience. And my advice to young people come up, I say, it's not about you. And it took me a while to get there, because there was a lot about Joe when I first started. That comes with maturing and getting confidence. And once I learned it, I think that's kind of where my career maybe took off. If I can say take off. I mean, where my career got better.
I think you can say that.
Yeah.
I think you can say that.
So, Joe knows this, but I remember watching him when he was on WKBT in La Crosse. I grew up in Winona. We had 2 television stations that we received, WEAU out of Eau Claire and WKBT out of La Crosse. So I was very familiar with Joe Schmit when I was just, we're not that far apart in age, but you were probably just freshly out of college, or maybe even in college.
I was in college. So funny story how I learned how to do this. I've always kind of been a hustler, and not necessarily in the hustling to get it done. I've been a hustler kind of figuring out the angles so it worked for me. So WKBT was one of the last stations in the nation that used film. So I learned how to process film. They had 2 people at the station that knew how to process film. I thought, I'm going to learn how to do that. I interned there. Well, guess what? One of the people quit who knew how to process film. The other one got sick. All of a sudden, I'm the only person, a junior in college, who knew how to process film for the news that night. So I was working 7 days a week. And I went into the news director and I said, you've got your news guy reading sports on the weekend. That's what they were doing back then. I said, I'll keep processing film for you. If you put me on, let me do the weekend sports. That's how I got the weekend sports job.
That's a good story.
So I did the hustle thing, and then I stayed on there, and I was awful. I mean, I really was. I mean, I'm sure at one point I had some tapes of it. I kind of wish I had it now, because I was embarrassed back then. Now I'd look back and laugh and say, you know what, I must have done some work to get there.
Yeah, there's a good lesson there, though, about you call it hustling, but finding ways to do what you want to do. Sometimes you got to be creative.
Yeah, make yourself invaluable, and it was. And sometimes, like someone said, "What was your big break?" That was my big break, but I kind of made my break by, being a little aware.
For sure. So you television for many, many years. Obviously, it sounds like a goal of yours, and you got there. But you left television for a little bit, for 3 years, to become president of a media company, marketing company. You did some work with Sun Country Airlines. For a couple of years there. Why did you decide, or what made you decide to leave TV and what you were so comfortable with to go do something else, and then to really get back to TV?
Well, so when I left, I was getting a little burned out. And that was back in the days, TV had bigger budgets. And that was back in the days Minnesota had some pretty successful teams. So I was traveling with a lot of other teams in the playoffs, and 2 years in a row I worked 44 out of 45 days on the road for half of it. It was like a Timberwolves run, a Wild run, a Gopher basketball run. So all of a sudden I'm looking at my family, and then this opportunity came along to join a media company, not as good as Pat's company, but and be on the front line, have some equity in the company, and see if we could make it grow. So I thought about that, and I thought about my family, and I knew I was missing too much, so I decided to do it. And I was getting burned out. I didn't want to get bitter. And then anyway, some major changes at the company that I was working with, the parent company, and by then I was running a nonprofit charity, and KSTP called and asked me if I'd come back, and I thought at that time, you know what, this is who I am, what I'm all about.
Found out you kind of missed it a little bit.
I did.
Wanted to spend the time with.
I missed the, there would be, the one thing that I missed when I was away was game 163. And Pat, you were probably with the Twins at that time, weren't you? And I remember sitting there watching the TV coverage at 163. And I'm going, why aren't they doing that? I would have done this. I want to be there. That was like, so that was the day where I was saying, yeah, it's still in me. It's in your blood. So that's the one thing I missed. But I look at what else I've seen. Because I came in 85. My first day, June 26, 1985, the opening of Canterbury Downs. So I go to Canterbury Downs to help out the KSTP crew. They have 50 people at the KSTP crowd down there. The newsroom I was working at in Green Bay had 50 people for the entire newscast. And they had 50 people at one event. It was crazy. But, I was, part of 87, 91. I've seen 4 NFC championship games go down to 2, Minneapolis Miracle. I mean, on and on. So I sit there and I look, man, a couple of Gopher basketball runs, the Gopher basketball controversies, going from the, just
a lot of the biggest moments in Minnesota sports.
Just, lucky and fun, and just to kind of have a very small, I didn't have a part in it. I was able to cover it and be there.
You mentioned how much sports has changed since you got into the business, right? I mean, there was a time when you got your highlights and your scores from the 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock sports report from guys like you.
Yep.
Obviously, with the internet now and everybody has a smartphone in their hand, they can get the updates immediately. They don't need to wait till 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock.
Right.
So How have you seen your role change as things have changed? Sports has changed over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, well, obviously it's, and back then we used to only have a 6 and 10 o'clock newscast. Now our TV station does 13 hours of local programming a day out of our studio. So we have a 4:30 news, a 5 o'clock news, 6, 6:30, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and then obviously the morning shows that they have that run from 4:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock. So I mean, there's so much. So you're asked to do a lot more with a lot less, which I'm not complaining about at all. But no matter what happens in the business, and maybe there are fewer viewers, you still need good storytellers. You still need people to go out and report. I think the worst thing that's happened in the business, I just saw like 3 local newspapers just went under this week. And I'm like going, that's really a shame that's happening, because you do need people to report and hold people accountable and to find out stuff. And I know sports, a lot of times we're not digging into heavy news, but we are digging into some things. How is this NIL money changing thing? What's going to happen when the sports gambling bill passes here? I mean, that's going to impact a lot of people. So to kind of say what's changed, obviously the way people get the news, and they are getting it on their phones. They are getting it at home. They can watch it later. They can tape it and just whip through it. But what hasn't changed is good storytelling, good reporting. I've never been a big guy to break a lot of stories. That's really never been my strength. I mean, I've done a few. I think that's a little bit overrated in our business, to be honest with you. I'd much rather do a good story that all of a sudden resonates and people talk about 3 days later.
So kind of related to that, it used to be in the old days, reporters, whether newspapers or TV, whatever, would report at the end of games and into the evening, and get stuff out for the next day. And now you and everybody's kind of expected to tweet and put posts out on the fly as games are happening, as things are happening. And so I don't know if that gives you a feeling that you got to be sort of live with your news every minute of the day, but how has that sort of affected what you do, and what are your thoughts about that shift?
Well, I'll start a little history first, Dave. I can remember back, let's say, for example, when Jerry Kill was named the head coach of the Gophers. We had it that he was going to be the head coach. The social media wasn't really going at that time. We were holding our breath that we were going to get on at 10 o'clock and nobody else had it. Mm-hmm. And we also knew if we waited until 10 o'clock, that the newspaper would have to scramble and we would have the story first. I mean, that's the kind of the business was. Now, we find out and confirm that Jerry Kill's named the head coach of the Gophers. We would have tweeted it out, we would have it on our website, we would have had everything ready to roll and try to take credit for the big scoop. But as I said, it's overrated. 2 minutes later, everybody else is on it. 2 minutes later, everybody else is saying, Jerry Kill's name. You might get it from KSTP for about a half a minute, and then the next thing, everybody is taking it as their own. So it's kind of overrated that way. But it really has changed the way we do it, because the old days, I think, I don't want to be the old days are better than the new days, but the old days were kind of fun when you had to sweat it out. When you had the story, you had to sweat it out, hope nobody else had it.
You mentioned the plethora of different sporting events that you've covered during your long career. Do you still get excited by sports? You still get excited to cover the athletes?
What's funny is I was driving to the Twins home opener, and it was, basically I figured out it was my 37th Twins home opener, and I was excited. And I went early for interviews, and it's like I talked to my wife on the phone, and I said, you know what? I said, I'm not ready to retire. I said, I still have, and I still sit there, and I sat there at the game, even though it was a lousy game. I just sat there at the game. I'm a pretty lucky guy. This is my office today. So, yeah, I do. Are there some things that maybe you don't like? Sure, it's like any job. Being awake at 10:30 at night as you get a little bit older sometimes, I got to kick it into high gear. You got to remember, the last 3 minutes of my workday is when I'm expected to be at my best.
Yeah.
So
Think of it that way.
yeah, there's no winding down. My winding down happens after. That's how come I have this sleep ring. I'm trying to figure out how to wind down.
So you talk a little bit about the change in media and, let's say, competition for stories. The scoop might not be quite the same, but still, Twin Cities is a big market. There's 4 major TV stations. There's radio and sports radio and all that now, as well as other media. So within the media itself, and you've been there for a long time, is there kind of a friendly competition between you and some of the others, and who have you kind of, I wouldn't say butted heads, but sort of wanted to, you've looked at each other like, hey, who's going to one up the other one, and who do you really enjoy out there in the media that you've worked with?
A good question. That's a really good question. It's probably changed a little bit. I think when we were younger and there were kind of 3 TV stations that were going at it, we were fairly competitive. Always never fought each other or whatever, but we certainly worked harder to have a better angle, better interview, better scoop. For years, Mark Rosen and I had a Sunday night show. We'd fight for guests, so it wasn't Johnny Carson, or Jay Leno against whoever, but
Right.
we would both want, on opening night of Vikings training camp, we'd both want Denny Green. So we would figure out ways to see who could get Denny Green, and then if you won, you were happy. If you lost, you weren't happy. But ultimately, we had, I think of Randy Shaver, Mark, and myself were kind of the longest running together. And at this stage in our careers, we have nothing but respect for each other. We always like seeing each other, always talk. Those guys understand my life and I understand their life. They understand my frustrations, I understand their frustrations. They work with newsrooms and news budgets and have people above them tell them what to do and what they can't do. So we all are kind of in it together. And so it's funny how it kind of changes over the years. It was pretty dog eat dog. Sure, we wanted to win. I'm a competitive guy. Right. But there was always that respect there, and now it's like more than ever.
You're a highly sought after public speaker. You're also an accomplished author. He's written 3 books, the most recent being The Right Thing to Do, the Joe Mauer story.
Yeah.
You were telling us before we started taping a little bit of the backstory to this, but if you would, please share them with our viewers.
Well, I've written 2 books, Silent Impact and The Impact Blueprint, and I use them when I speak to different leadership groups and associations and companies. And it's all about leadership and personal development and how we can all be more aware and intentional of the impact we have. And one of the stories I tell is Joe Mauer, who walked a young blind student by the name of Mike Hawley to the lunchroom every day when he was at Cretin-Derham Hall. And I always say, you have to realize just what Joe was. He was the coolest kid on campus, and there was a kid who sat by himself, who looked a little bit different, was a little different, ate lunch every day by himself. Joe saw this. Of all the people at that school to see this, Joe saw it and invited him to his table. So I put my reporter's cap on and talked to the 6 guys who sat around with those 2 guys and came up with my story. I wrote that story in Silent Impact. My publisher comes to me and says, Joe, you got to write another book. I said, I don't want to write another book. Writing a book's like having a baby. At least that's what I feel it must be like. You don't ask your wife to have another baby right after she gives birth. You wait a couple of months, right?
I think so. Yes.
At least if you want to stay married. Right. So anyway, she said, why don't you write a children's book with Joe Mauer? And I thought, wow, that one kind of hit me. Long story short, I called Joe. Joe and his wife, Maddie, and I got for breakfast. And I said, Joe, I don't want to make any money on this book. I said, let's do this book and make it 100% for charity. Let's see if we can get people to donate money, Blaze being one of the sponsors, donate money that we can donate books to school. That book is now has been donated to over 500 elementary schools in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the list continues to go on as people go. So the stories of kindness, compassion, and inclusivity, which are included in this book, are now being spread to another generation. Young kids who might not even know who Joe Mauer is, but their moms and dads do, and their grandmas and grandpas do, and that's who buys the book. Yeah. So we've been able to make a lot of money for 2 amazing charities, the Highland Friendship Club, which is Joe's favorite charity, and Thumbs Up for Mental Health in Elk River, which deals with kids dealing with the stress and anxiety and depression and all the things that kids deal with today that maybe we didn't have to deal with quite as much. And that charity started kind of because of the Joe Mauer story. A woman was inspired by that story, and Silent Impact decided to start a charity. So it's very cool how the full circle thing happened.
It's terrific.
It's a great story, and it does have an impact. I've gotten the book out to a couple of people, and I think you hit on something a little bit that, in this case, it was one particular person, but I think there's more people feeling that kind of thing, and I feel bad for kids today, sort of, compared to when we were kids, and just fitting in and everything they see. And
I can't tell you the cool things that have happened since this book is out. I had a principal who was a K through second grade principal who read it to every single class in their school and then had discussions, and then said the next day, all of a sudden I saw the kids who were outcast and a little strange and that nobody were friends with, they were all of a sudden invited into the cool group. I'm just like going, now all of a sudden they're going to find out we have a lot more in common than we do. And I also am hearing stories from parents saying, my kid is Mike. They go eat in the guidance office, their lunch. They eat by themselves at the table. And there are more of these kids out there that, need the cool kids to step up.
Yeah, sure.
how does it feel to have that story? Because you're probably on the Mount Rushmore of Minnesota sports, and you've had Emmy Awards, and you've had all that, and then you hear a story like that, how this had an impact. I mean, how does that stack up with all the accolades? And
this is the most rewarding thing. I'll tell you a story. So how I got into speaking is kind of what happened here. When you're on TV, you're getting asked to speak to athletic banquets, optimist, whatever, And whenever I went up there, at first I would get up there and I would talk about what it was like to be in the locker room at the '87 World Series and what it was like to cover Randy Moss. And all of a sudden I'm like going, I'm going to dislocate my shoulder, pat myself on the back the next time I speak. And all of a sudden I realized, I got to speak. I got to give them some meat. So I worked on it. And the Mauer story was one of the ones I worked on. So I told this Mauer story. And all of a sudden people say, you got to write a book. All of a sudden people come up to, you ever speak to X and Y and Z company? We're going to pay you some money to come in and speak. So right about this time, Walter Bond, remember Walter Bond played for the Gophers? Yep. Walter Bond sees me speak at a banquet like this. He comes up to me afterwards, we're having breakfast tomorrow. 7:30, Wyzetta, whatever. I said, okay. He goes, you're going to speak? I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to mentor you. So Walter Bond became my first mentor. Walter Bond's in the National Speaking Hall of Fame. Now, Walter Bond charges an exorbitant amount of money to go out and speak. He is, he's Zig Ziglar. He's Tony Robbins. I mean, he's amazing. And so I started a business. I decided to quit talking about Joe and start talking about other people who make an impact.
Joe, this conversation went by way too fast.
It's done already?
Fast half an hour.
Can't we extend?
Thank you so much for being on Behind the Game and sharing your story and sharing the book, which is fantastic.
Well, thank you guys. It's been an honor. You're doing great work on this show, and thank Dan at Stoltz, Dan Stoltz at Blaze. I'm just surprised he's not here because there's a camera here. So.
Yeah, you and me both. You and me both.
Yeah, and thank you, Dave Bowden.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank all of you for watching Behind the Game. We'll see you again next month.